and the committee today is meeting in public session. Mobile phone notice. I'd like to remind members to ensure their mobile phones are switched off, and we've received apologies today from Deputy Brophy and Senator Terry Leyden. Today I'm very glad to say that we have engagement on the work of the General Affairs Council, the GAC, with Minister Helen McEntee. On behalf of the committee, Minister, I would like to welcome you back again to our committee to discuss your work on the General Affairs Council, and in particular those issues expected at the next meeting and any developments since we met at the end of September. I would normally read out the usual reminder of the rules of privilege, but as the Minister is very well aware of these, we just need to remind every one of us about that application. So, Minister, I would like to get straight into it and invite you to make your opening statements, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you, as always, for the opportunity to be here and to update you on the work that I'm doing. I have quite a lengthy update because I suppose it's been a busy period since we met last, so if members could indulge me and allow me to go through this, but obviously I'm happy to take questions afterwards as well. As I've said, it's been a busy period since I was here with you in last September. I'm delighted to be here again to update you on the developments. This month's General Affairs Council meeting, which will take place next Tuesday, will focus on a number of issues, including a presentation by the Commission on the European semester, on the rule of law in Poland, the values of the Union in relation to Hungary. However, I expect the most substantial discussion will be a focus on the MFF and the preparation of the December European Council. With your permission, I propose to focus on 4 key headlines. Of course, members, as I've said, are free to raise any questions that they want throughout the Q&A later on. The 4 key areas. Firstly, I think it goes without saying, the current state of play in relation to Brexit. Secondly, the multi-annual financial framework, or the MFF, for the period of 2021 to 27. The single market, particularly in relation to services, and the digital single market, which is going to be a key focus. And lastly, just about the future of Europe debate and the citizens' dialogue, where I'll outline what we have done and the reports which we have published since our discussions and meetings last year. Firstly, in relation to Brexit, since I spoke with you last, we have obviously seen significant progress with respect to the Brexit negotiations. The agreed withdrawal agreement ensures that the UK will leave the EU in an orderly manner. It will avoid a scenario where they instead crash out without a deal, a scenario that would have severe consequences for everyone, the UK, the EU, but most particularly for us, Ireland. The withdrawal agreement achieves our negotiating priorities. I should say, since the beginning of the negotiations, we have insisted that there could be no scenario that would in any way result in a return to a hard border on the island of Ireland. The backstop provisions provided an important insurance policy that we will not see the return of any kind of a border on this island. If invoked, these will apply unless and until another agreement which delivers the same outcome is in its place. This agreement was achieved with the support of our EU partners, as well as, I would say, the tireless efforts of Michel Barnier and his task force, and of course all of our own Irish officials at home and abroad, and we are very grateful to them for their understanding and their solidarity. As the Taoiseach said, there could be no better example of the advantages of the EU membership for a small country. Under this deal, the Good Friday Agreement, the gains made by the peace process, they are protected. The rights, safeguards and equality of opportunity as set out in the Good Friday Agreement are also protected, and the EU citizenship rights for people in Northern Ireland are confirmed. This agreement underscores continuing North-South cooperation, which of course is vital to all of this island. Last month, the European Council member states gave their unanimous approval to the agreement. They also approved the political declaration, which sets out the framework for the future relationship between the European Union and the United Kingdom moving forward. This document provides us with a roadmap to begin negotiations with the UK on what kind of a relationship the EU and the UK will have in the years ahead. While the UK may be leaving, it will remain an important partner both to the EU and to Ireland, and to that end it is extremely important and welcome that both sides have committed to agreeing a deep and a comprehensive relationship. The withdrawal agreement represents important compromises on both sides. However, I think it ensures that the key interests of the EU and the UK are addressed. As EU leaders have made it clear, it represents the best way ahead for all of us, delivering on what we all want, an orderly withdrawal, including through an effective transition period, and it lays the foundation for very constructive negotiations on the EU's future relationship with the UK. I believe it's fair and it's balanced, and it has been achieved after very long and very difficult negotiations, and it's in all of our interests that it is ratified and, of course, not reopened. Of course, all of these challenges lie ahead, and the withdrawal agreement will be subject to a meaningful vote in the UK House of Commons on the 11th of December next Tuesday, and we hope that the Prime Minister can succeed in this regard and that it will be accepted. However, nothing can be taken for granted, and the Government will continue our intensive programme of work to prepare for all eventualities, including a no-deal Brexit, to make sure that we are as prepared, that industry, that citizens are as prepared as we can be. Moving on to the MFF, or the Multiannual Financial Framework, the European Commission published its overall proposals for the EU financial framework from 2021 to 2027 in May just gone by. Since then, an intense programme of analysis and negotiations has been continuing at official and political level under the Bulgarian and since then Austrian presidencies. The MFF is now a standing item on the agenda of the General Affairs Council, and I expect that that will continue in the same manner and continue to be the case under the Romanian presidency, which begins in January next year. At the General Affairs Council next week, we will discuss the latest presidency report on the state of play of the negotiations. The Austrian presidency has focused on identifying the key budgetary and associated elements and principles on which the agreement is needed. These components will be included in a set of draft conclusions, but without the actual financial amount. The purpose of the so-called negotiating box, as it's been called, is to single out issues which will be for the heads of state and indeed for the governments to ultimately decide under unanimity. Broadly, Ireland agrees with the elements identified as those being ones which will require political agreement. They are broadly balanced. We believe that they reflect the competing priorities for all Member States, and at the European Council later on next week, the heads of state and government will discuss the progress report. My own expectation is that the European Council will welcome the significant progress that has been made and achieved under the Austrian presidency, and it will call for the Romanian presidency to continue that work on the basis of the Austrian progress report. It will continue to be a government priority next year, and we will secure Ireland's interest in the negotiations on the EU's financial framework for the 7 years from 21 to 27. CAP, of course, as all members I think would agree, remains a priority for Ireland. Agricultural expenditure helps to support at least 44 million jobs across the EU. It contributes to food safety, animal welfare, rural sustainability and environmental standards. The Government is also supportive of programmes to keep pace with the rapid changes in the global economy and to help support jobs and to help support growth. I'm thinking specifically of measures such as cohesion funding, the research and innovation budget, which is known as Horizon Europe, Digital Europe and Connecting Europe facility. We also welcome the particular focus on young people, the focus to increase spending and funding for an expanded Erasmus Plus programme, among many other things. And lastly, I think we must ensure flexibility in the budget to deal with the potential negative consequences of Brexit, but indeed possible consequences of other issues which may arise in years to come. While there had been an initial ambitions to conclude the MFF negotiations by next year, when we know the European elections will take place, that timeframe has become increasingly unlikely. The most important thing is to get the budget right, and I expect that the Council will look to reach an agreement on the MFF, most likely later on in 2019 after the elections. An agreed budget which meets our requirements to deliver on the EU programmes and on which agreement can be reached by all Member States is essential. Moving to the single market, Chairman, this year marks the 25th anniversary of the single market. It's a landmark achievement of the European Union. The March European Council called earlier on this year on the Commission to present by the end of this year an assessment of the functioning of the internal market and the remaining barriers to inter-EU trade of goods and services. The Commission's communication, adopted on the 22nd of November and presented to the Competitiveness Council on the 29th of November just gone, is entitled "The Single Market in a Changing World, a Unique Asset in Need of Renewed Political Commitment." The European Council has been expected to hold a policy debate on the single market at its December meeting based on that Commission communication. In fact, a detailed discussion is now not expected to take place until March of next year. However, we are working with a large group of like-minded partners to ensure that the European Council adopts meaningful, focused conclusions this month, calling for a new forward-looking approach for digital policy and single market policy, including in the area of services, which for us, given the fact that over 50% of our exports are in the area of services, this is extremely important. Last month in Brussels, Minister for Business, Enterprise and Innovation, Heather Humphreys, together with her colleagues from Finland, from Denmark and the Czech Republic, launched a report examining the functioning of the single market, particularly in the area of services. This report is titled Making EU Trade Services Work for All, and was commissioned from the Copenhagen Economics, of which we've had a number of reports in recent years. It finds major shortcomings in EU services sector performance, but great potential for future development. Through the single market, or though the single market is key to the EU's welfare, prosperity and competitiveness, it has not delivered the same benefits for services in terms of reducing barriers to inter-trade EU as it has for trade in goods. The service sector gaps are critical in an economy where digitalisation has become the norm and where services are increasingly an intrinsic part of manufactured goods. The flip side is that there is great potential for improving the functioning of the EU services sector, global competitiveness, productivity and the EU share of the world economy. I share Minister Humphrey's hope that our report will help shape the discussions in 2019, as the Minister said last week in Brussels, making it easier for companies to buy and sell services, particularly across borders in the single market, is crucial to our competitiveness as the digital economy actively grows. I might also add that the study is a concrete example of alliance building in Ireland. This project illustrates Ireland's ability to leverage relationships with other member states and to advance common policy interests. Moving on to the future of Europe, turning to the debate which has been ongoing across Europe. As the committee will be well aware, last year the government launched a citizens' dialogue on the future of Europe, which many members here have taken part in. It's taken me around the country listening to people discuss the kind of Europe that they want. They've shared their views on how we can build a union that is prosperous and competitive, safe and secure, one that is socially responsible, one that is sustainable, and one that equips us to meet the challenges of the future in an ever increasingly global world. The level of engagement has been fantastic, and the overriding message, I think, is that people want fairness. They want environmental protection, they want intergenerational fairness, they want our young people to have all of the opportunities that they should, at the same time supporting and protecting our older generations. I think it's striking, perhaps maybe just to say that how people see Europe through the prism of values as well, and words like peace, community, solidarity, education, diversity, all of these words continue to come up in all of the discussions that we have, and I think we need to use them and make sure that they're at the heart of all of the decisions that we take on the future of the Union. In October, I was joined by my colleague Gernot Blumel, the Austrian Federal Minister for the EU Arts, Culture and Media, for the launch of this report on the Citizens' Dialogue, and was delighted to have the opportunity to launch the report not just with the Presidency but in close cooperation with the EU. I was also very pleased that members of this committee were able to attend, and I thank them for that. European leaders on a much broader stage are committed to listening, to responding to the concerns of their citizens. We all want to offer a vision of Europe that people can trust and support. The dialogues are part of a wider citizens' consultation taking part across all of the European Union, both in Member States and at a pan-European level, and all of these presentations will be concluded at a dialogue in situ next May, where European leaders will come together. I might shorten it down a little bit just so that we have time for everybody. I think it's important maybe again to stress, despite its imperfections, people see Europe at the heart of their future, and indeed Ireland at the heart of Europe. In May, an opinion poll found that 92% of Irish people believe that Ireland should remain a part of the European Union. When we asked our young people, our 18 to 26 years, this rises to 97%, so it's obviously very positive. I think these are encouraging, but obviously by no means can we be complacent, and as I'm sure each and every member here would agree, when it comes to Europe, people don't spend their lives thinking about Europe on a daily basis, and as Emily O'Reilly pointed out at our final Citizens' Dialogue, for people politics continues to be local, and so we need to make sure that they know and understand how Europe impacts on their daily lives, and not just what happens maybe at a larger scale. So when we talk about Europe, again, as I've said, how does it impact on people on their daily lives, and how does it reflect the treaty-based values which we all have essentially bind us together as Europeans. Mr. Chairman, before I conclude, I will briefly outline two other important topics which have been preoccupying the General Affairs Council of lately, namely the rule of law in Poland and indeed the values of the Union in relation to Hungary, and this is something members would be well aware of. The central issue in the rule of law and its application in Poland. In October, the European Court of Justice issued an interim ruling ordering Poland to adopt measures to temporarily suspend the application of the relevant Polish legislation. Poland has since adopted legislation to amend the Supreme Court law and to enable return to work of judges who were forced to retire. Following on from the hearings in June and September, the GAC next Tuesday will hold another hearing. Ours is a union based on shared values, including democracy, human rights and the rule of law. We have consistently supported the Commission on this particular matter. We have also emphasised that dialogue between Poland and the Commission needs to result in substantive outcomes that address the concerns identified. And we have taken part, just to say, in both of those hearings to date, and will take part in the hearing next week. Separately, the European Parliament adopted a report or a reasoned proposal inviting the Council to determine whether there is a serious risk of breach by Hungary of the values of which the European Union is founded. They have issued a written response, Hungary, in relation to this report. The Commission are also preparing a paper on the values-related infringement procedures that it has taken to address the concerns with the situation in Hungary. And at next week's GAC, there will be a smaller discussion, but none the least a discussion on these documents and hopefully a proposal as to how to move forward. In relation to the main issue, I think, on people's minds, the Central European University in Hungary, I very much regret that it has been forced into a situation where it is required to relocate from Budapest to Vienna. Academic freedom is one of the fundamental values within the Union, and I think it's a sad day when an institute feels that it has no other choice but to leave an EU member state because it cannot continue its operations in the way that it should. So these are obviously issues that we need to raise and that we need to address. I want to thank you for attendance. Apologies for maybe going on a bit longer, but there was obviously a lot that has happened, and I just want to maybe before we rise for Christmas, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and all of your staff and team here at the committee, and obviously to all the committee members for your support throughout the year, and just to wish you a happy Christmas and a happy New Year for 2019.
Thank you very much, Minister, and of course we wish you, your family, your staff and everyone the very best, a good look always too. We want to thank you for being here, and you put a lot into that comprehensive report. So could I first of all go to Senator Crockwell, because I know you're on a time constraint.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Minister, you will forgive me. I'm going to fling a few things at you and then run out the door. I have a bit of a name for throwing the grenade and running. But on this occasion, I'm sorry, I do have other meetings arranged. I want to start by congratulating you, but more importantly, Minister, I want to congratulate those officials that work on behalf of Ireland all over Europe, the people you engage with on a daily basis, the ambassadors, their staff, and the work they have done leading up to Brexit really has to be acknowledged by those of us in political life. Without them, I don't think we would have had half the work done. There isn't a corner of Europe that is not aware of the unique Irish situation with respect to Brexit. And I know that while you break your heart doing that on a daily basis, your officials continue to do it in each one of the countries. So I want to acknowledge their work, and it has been ongoing. My fear now is that all this work will have been for nothing as Britain falls apart in Brexit, and the likelihood we hear screams now for a second referendum and all sorts of things. It looks very much like Prime Minister May will not be able to carry her government and indeed the House of Commons on the Brexit vote, and we're thrown into a complete and utter quagmire at that stage. We don't know where they're going. One thing we have never ever addressed in this country is, first and foremost, the concept of a hard border, and secondly, where we're going. There has never been a hard border in Ireland since the foundation of the state. There have been what I would call very, very militaristic crossings. The border crossings have been very, very difficult to get through, and border management has been a huge problem. But there were never barbed wire and walls to stop people crossing over and back across the border in fields and on unapproved roads and things. But there is a likelihood that we could find ourselves going back to that situation where we're managing a border situation again. And the Fianna Fáil party actually made that point on Sunday night on the TV, that we need to increase the Gardaí in order to look after a border should that situation arise. And my question is that we reorganised the Defence Forces in 2012 and we moved all of the troops south. So in a line from Dublin to Galway, most soldiers and most airmen and most of our naval service is accommodated in the southern part of the country. We only have military people in Donegal and in Dundalk, and both of them units are providing day-to-day security services in Dublin. So my question there is, with Cavan and Monaghan closed, if we find ourselves with a managed border as we had it during the horrible 70s, 80s, 90s and noughties, will the government, or has the government, war-gamed that situation? Has their contingency plans been put in place with respect to the military side, more so than the Gardaí? Then moving on, Minister, and you'll forgive me if I move on to a number of things fairly quickly, the issue of CAP. The Common Agricultural Policy has been the backbone of the Irish agricultural industry, and one of the questions I have is, as we move forward in a new Europe, will Common Agricultural Policy be, shall we say, more aligned with environmental concerns? Because agriculture is our backbone, but if agriculture is destroying the environment, we have to find a way of finding a balance there. I don't in any way wish to see the farming community suffer, but at the same time, CAP is going to have to be reorganised, and I'll be reading up on what you have to say on this, Minister. I'll finish on the following: the future of Europe. You have done a tremendous job indeed with your colleagues on engaging the population on a discussion on the future of Europe. And one of the things that surprises me a little is Timmerman is moving towards subsidiarity and proportionality, which, if you want, is bringing decision-making to the lowest common denominator when it comes to law-making and regulations, etc., etc. In Ireland, we seem to be centralising rather than distributing power. We seem to be moving to larger councils. We seem to have the Department of Housing Environment taking more and more away from local authorities. And I wonder how you see that fitting into the model of the Europe I see going forward. You spoke about the 92% of Irish and indeed 97% of our young people being totally committed to Europe. But that's when you get to the micro level. Yet in the macro level, there is a disturbing movement of people condemning Europe. And we in politics have a bit to take a blame for that, insofar as we constantly blame Brussels for decisions we agree to in the first place. But I just wonder, on the area of subsidiarity, if you have anything to say on that. And finally, Minister, the education and training, that is the one thing that has committed every young person I know to Europe. The ability to travel throughout Europe and to take educational courses anywhere in Europe. But to a certain degree, it is for the bourgeois class, those that can afford university education, etc., etc. I want to see more movement in training and in apprenticeship across Europe, and I just wonder if you've seen any real desire to bring that on board over the coming, shall we say, the period 2020 to 2027. If there's going to be a greater effort to engage at that level. I'm talking about training rather than academic. I'm talking about apprenticeship rather than university. Well, quite a lot of apprenticeship will be done in technological universities, but I think you understand what I'm talking about.
Thank you very
Chairman,
much,
I want to thank you for giving me that opportunity. And Minister, I will take the time to read your answers, and I thank you for allowing me to leave now.
Thank you very much, Senator. Senator Neil Richmond, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and apologies for having to pop out there for a vote in the Shannon Chamber. Minister, you're very welcome, obviously, back again to our committee for one of your regular and greatly appreciated updates, covering a whole range of areas ahead of next week's important GAC meeting. And I'd like to kind of start at the finish and work back to the meatier subject of Brexit at the end, if you don't mind. In relation to Hungary, need to say this is extremely worrying, what's been going on the last number of days. But I know that the Irish government has repeatedly raised this with the Hungarian government at official and political level. I'm a little bit concerned, and I think we need now at this stage to do a bit more than just simply voice concern with the Hungarian government. I welcome the measures taken in Poland, and I welcome the efforts that the European Commission and European Council has made in that regard. And I think we do need to step up the pressure on the Hungarian government in this regard, and I think the sooner the better. In relation to the future of Europe, I suppose looking ahead to the key council meeting in Romania, when it's all compiled and discussion, do you have any insight or prediction of what the results may be, and indeed what, looking at the report that you produced and you launched, what the key aims of the Irish government would be and how we will work to influence other member states? Obviously you mentioned your Austrian partner at the launch. In relation to the multi-annual financial framework, I'm going to leave the issue of CAP to colleagues with, I suppose, a more rural focus in their constituencies. And I'm greatly enthused by the potential increases for both Erasmus Plus and Horizon 2020. However, these increases are very welcome. They pose a particularly unique challenge, I think, to the Irish Government and our approach to these going forward. In relation to Erasmus Plus, I genuinely think we are underrepresented in terms of the receipts we get this, both at an academic level but also in the civic society. I think we can be doing so much more. And if we look at the comparative, the amount of French students coming here for Erasmus and the amount of Irish students going back to France, it's a huge deficit, and we need to plug those gaps, and we need to encourage more and more young Irish people to take up the opportunity in third level, to take up an Erasmus place, and then to perhaps use that to develop their European language skills, and maybe even work it into the EU jobs campaign, because we really need more and more Irish people taking the concours and taking the career positions in the European institutions. And I acknowledge the extremely massive efforts made by both you personally and your department in encouraging EU jobs and how vital that is. But in relation to Horizon 2020, this is something that is going to pose a unique challenge post-Brexit. So many of our research coordinated efforts by Irish third level institutions is with British alternatives, and those receiving grants, a lot of them are doing it in partnership with British universities. There will be a huge difficulty in replacing those with other continental European universities, particularly those who don't use English as a first language. On an academic terms, obviously no other member state uses English as a first language, and I just think that's something that we need to be alive to, that yes, it's great that the MFF is going to award more funds to these two really important programmes, but there's no point if the funds being increased, if Ireland isn't poised in a position. I know this is work that you'll need to do with Minister Zappone and Minister McHugh, but we need to be poised in a position to take those funds and use them as best possible. When it comes to Brexit, it's very hard to know where to start. The ongoing pantomime in Westminster, I believe, is proving to be quite a distraction to what is an overall manageable process. And I think it's in a marked contrast to the reactions both here and indeed on the continent to what is a quite simplistic withdrawal agreement package. I mean, we see a lot of the rhetoric coming on and a lot of the revelations, be it court rulings or Attorney General's advice, and it's as if people think this is new news. A lot of this is stuff that's known, and a lot of stuff has been on the record for a long time. And I appreciate the government and the entire European Union's consistent approach to this. I am interested just by one kind of finding produced today by JP Morgan, where they've changed, I suppose, their predictions a lot. And I know, a lot of these analyst countries, and they have to be very wary with their predictions, but an orderly Brexit has gone from being 60% likely to 50% likely. No Brexit has gone from 20% likely to 40% likely, and a no-deal scenario has gone from 20% likely down to 10%. Now, it's obviously very welcome that JP Morgan believe that we're moving further away from a no-deal scenario, but I suppose my question relates to, and it's something Donald Tusk has mentioned, is that you talked rightly about preparations for all scenarios, and Senator Crockwell went to the detail in relation to that. And I know that work that's been going on by it as a whole-of-government approach. But I suppose the orderly Brexit is something, I do believe that is where we're going, and it's quite clear that there is only one deal on the table. It's this deal, no deal, or no Brexit. And my question is in relation to a no Brexit. I presume it's taken as a given that that would be welcomed. That if the United Kingdom were to change their mind at a government level, that obviously Ireland would be the first EU member state to say, yeah, stop the roller coaster and get off. And we can go back to what will be very difficult, but we could go back to a relationship with an EU of 28. Hopefully maybe 29 and 30 in due course, because I fundamentally still believe there's no such thing as a good Brexit, and it would be far more beneficial at any stage for the UK to remain within the EU than to leave the EU under any deal. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator. And could I please go now to Deputy Bernard Durkan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like other speakers, I want to welcome the Minister and her assistants here, and to compliment her for the role that she played in the recent Brexit debates and negotiations, long-running that they were, and to include in that the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach and all ministers of government and opposition people who played a role in relation to it. A very intricate operation. I believe that the correct position was adopted by the Irish government. I think that position had been held throughout. And there's a very good reason for that. There was no alternative position. There was no alternative to the role adopted by the Irish government. I think that was recognised by the European Union, by Michel Barnier in particular, and the rest of the European Union members. And the way that they supported the Irish government is to be recognised, I think, and acknowledged. And I think it also underlines the importance of having support at a crucial time in business of that nature, because there was no other place to be. So I think compliments, Minister, and our thanks. Incidentally, a lot of people are inquiring as to what Plan B might be. I would say, very respectfully, stay away from that spot. In a negotiating situation, Chairman, the one thing you never disclose, it's like playing poker, is you never announce what your next move is going to be. Because from the point that you do, that immediately becomes the position from whence you resile. And that's not a good place to be. So I think 100% success so far. Very important to hold the position that was being held, and will continue to prevail, and will bring about eventually something that is acceptable right across Europe. I'm not going to go over all of the issues, but other than to say that the future of Europe comes to mind. Yes, the single market, very quickly, the single market. I'm not so certain that we always get the full benefit of the single market. I've spoken about this in the Health Committee meetings and other meetings as well, that we need to be constantly aware of the fact that we're part of Europe, that single market, and the power that goes with a 500 million population, 500 million plus population, hugely important when sourcing goods and materials, when sourcing services. You're in a far better bargaining position to be coming from a market of 500 million people than coming from a market of 5 million, or whatever the case may be. So we need to reiterate the need to avail of the full benefit of being part of that market when it comes to negotiating with the pharmaceutical sector, or in any sector in business throughout Europe and globally. In relation to the future of Europe, I want to just say that, like a lot of other people and the opinions expressed already, I would have concerns that, and have expressed this before, that some Europeans have in recent times shown a tendency to, as it were, look outside Europe, or to move away from the central core of what has been European fundamental policy and stood the test of time extremely well. I think that's a dangerous place to go. I think it is anti the ideals of the modern Europe. I think that we have enough of our combined history to show us that that's not the place to be. And that if we want to have a peaceful and prosperous Europe, which we had and continue to have, albeit under duress, for some considerable length of time, the biggest single peace arrangement on the globe has been the European Union in the last 50, 60 years. So I think that we wouldn't want to lose sight of that. And while people will from time to time have issues, and will look abroad and will look at alternatives, very good thing for them to look again and again, and not to be underimpressed by the success of Europe as it was and as it should be and as it will continue to be, provided it is given that support. I want to just quickly say that in relation to what Europe is to us, I believe that we have taken ownership of our part of Europe. We are Europeans, and we should never resile from that. I think that's been our strength. I don't believe that every European country on the continent of Europe and within the European Union is fully committed to that process at the present time. There are slight indications of movement away from the centre of that. I think it's a dangerous place to go. And again, we have our combined history to consult if we really want to know what the dangers are in relation to that. So in relation to the issues in Poland, I welcome the success so far. In relation to the issues in Hungary, we would be worried about tendencies that have shown up in recent times. We've been worried about tendencies that have emerged in the last couple of years, and we've spoken about it here, and particularly, and I'm not saying this because we are furthest away from the immigration issue across Europe. You know, barbed wire and walls do not resolve a problem, and unless we all recognise that right across Europe and right across the globe, we will have a serious issue to deal with at some time in the not-too-distant future. And we want to avoid conflict. We need to recognise that it's very difficult to say to people, by the way, you're on the wrong side of that line, you're on the wrong side of that border, and you must stay there. And we will ensure that you do stay there. And so we too, as a member of the European community, we have to show our own solidarity with the European principles in relation to that. CAP, I disagree with my colleague who's now gone absent in relation to CAP. CAP is a hugely important issue for this country in particular, and for a number of other food-producing countries throughout Europe. It will remain that. It is hugely important that we don't lose sight of that, because the people have to eat. And that was one of the reasons that the European Economic Community was founded in the first instance, was to make sure to eliminate starvation, as Europe had first-hand experience of that in the aftermath of the Second World War. Last point I want to make again, Mr. Chairman, is I, like other speakers, will have to go to the other House shortly as well, but to offer our congratulations to all the negotiators, officials and politicians who took part in that very crucial negotiation over the last couple of years, and to wish you well in the future, and to be absolutely certain that the route that has been pursued is the right one, because there is no other one. We could not be in any other place, Mr. Chairman. We couldn't be in any other place in relation to the island of Ireland, in relation to the North-South trade, in relation to the Good Friday Agreement. There was no other place we could be. To do otherwise would have been a disaster. So I compliment and offer our support.
Thanks very, very much, Deputy. Deputy Seán Haughey, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and I'd like to thank the Minister for her comprehensive report to the committee in relation to the issues being confronted by the European Union at this time. Just in relation to the Special European Council meeting and the political declaration and the future relationship generally between the UK and the EU, could you tell us what are Ireland's priorities in relation to the future relationship? And I did put a question to the Taoiseach in the Dáil just now about the European Council meeting, the special meeting in Brussels, and he told me that, he told the Dáil and told me that they went around all the heads of state or heads of government and they all outlined their priorities. Is there general agreement among the EU 27 of what we want to see in relation to the future relationship? Having regard to the declaration, but more importantly, what are Ireland's priorities in relation to those negotiations, which hopefully will proceed in due course? I note that you say that the government is preparing for all eventualities and scenarios with regard to Brexit, including a no-deal Brexit. Can you just give us a little bit more information on that? Are we talking about the upgrade of our ports and airports? Are we talking about supports for small businesses and SMEs and so on? I think we are in for a rocky period if the vote goes the way we all think it will go on December 11th, although a week is a long time in politics. So I think we need to brace ourselves economically for anything happening after December the 11th in relation to the value of the pound, in relation to cross-border trade, Christmas shopping. It could all happen quite quickly. So please reassure us that you are prepared for all eventualities and scenarios. In relation to the single market, just to wish you well in your endeavours there. I think it's an ideal, absolutely worthy of further action and to be pursued. And it is in the interest of the citizens at the end of the day. The citizens will greatly benefit from the agenda set out in relation to the single market, and that's to be welcome. In relation to the future of Europe, I note that there will be a big European Council meeting in Romania in May 2019, and I'd be interested to know how you see that panning out. Do you envisage big decisions being taken at that European Council meeting? Big big changes taking place, or do you think it's going to be more aspirational, more just setting out a new vision for Europe, or do you think there will be major practical steps announced at that regarding the future of the European Union? I'm particularly interested in moves towards further integration. We discussed that here last week with the representative of the European Commission in Ireland. Is there a move towards further integration among many or all of the EU states, and how is that likely to proceed? And also, just to agree with what everybody has said in relation to Poland and Hungary, the democratic, liberal European values are dear to us all, and I welcome the moves which have been taken in that regard by the European Commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Senator Paul Coughlin, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and apologies. Shannon Business and a vote held me up. I agree with my colleagues generally, and I congratulate you, Minister, and your colleagues at government level on all of your inputs at the various meetings in the time past. Talking about Brexit, I think the most significant thing regarding the 3 votes yesterday in the Commons was the final one on Dominic Reeves' motion, the former AG. He was a very learned man. I think that, in a sense, while Downing Street wouldn't be saying it, that, in a sense, I think, could be interpreted as a Downing Street backstop. I think it's clear now that there is no majority for a no deal in the Commons, thanks be to God, and the Parliament will have a say when, as we now expect, the Prime Minister will lose that vote next Tuesday. So, Minister, the important thing, and I'm sure you're dealing with this already, the future arrangements, the policy declaration document, while nobody envisages any change whatsoever in regard to the deal that was hammered out, but as I'm given to understand it, you can tweak the declaration document on the future, which is probably large fudge anyway. I'm not sure. You'll be more familiar with that than me. I don't know if you wish to comment. It probably mightn't be appropriate for you to comment whatsoever on that. But I think at this stage anyway, we have to look beyond next Tuesday. Presumably the Prime Minister will go to the following summit, and things may be able to happen there. And then, as we know, there will be some subsequent votes in the Commons because of what they decided yesterday, as I say, on the Grieve motion. But I look forward to your comments, Minister, and thank you for everything.
Thank you very much, Senator. Could I call Nuno, Minister, to give you an overview?
Thank you very much, and thank you to all the members for their questions. So if I forget any or skip any, or not intentionally, just let me know. Firstly, Senator Crockwell's questions in terms of Brexit and the concept of a hard border. So as we have said throughout this entire process, and in particular in the last number of months and year, our preparation for all possible outcomes has increased, and that's from the best outcome, where we have a close and comprehensive free trading relationship with the UK, to a no-deal scenario. And obviously in that regard we have been working with all of our departments, all of our ministers, who have been asked to identify the possible challenges that they and their industries and sectors and departments may face. Following on from that, they have been asked to identify possible measures, whether it's funding, whether it's changes to legislation, whether it's additional supports or measures that they would need in those scenarios. Obviously doing this without the knowledge of the full extent of what might happen, but in as much as they possibly can. And now what we have is each department preparing, if not prepared already, a report or an action plan which could be put in place. Now, they have not been published, and obviously, given the fact that we are still in negotiations, it's not something that would be published, but we have in the interim tried to support business that are already been impacted. The fact that there is such uncertainty out there, we have over 750 million over the past 3 budgets have been provided directly in support for small and medium business. You have this year alone an extra 115 million supporting our government agencies as well, as are expanding programmes like Global Ireland 2025, which is looking to expand our horizons beyond the UK, beyond Europe and through the rest of the world, and doubling our global footprint. So a lot of measures have already been put in place. We're making contingency plans for when we know what the actual outcome will be. But in terms of a hard border, as the Senator has asked, we are not preparing for a hard border. We are looking at customs and checks in terms of east to west, because we know that even with the best possible outcome, there will still be some changes. Funding was approved in this year's budget for over 500 staff, whether it's customs officials, revenue, sanitary or phytosanitary checks, and obviously then the remaining 500 or so will be allocated in time as well. But we are not preparing for a border north and south, and that is very much on the basis that every political party, that the UK government, that every member state, the Commission, the Parliament and indeed ourselves have all committed that there would be no return to a hard border, and we believe that irrespective of the outcome, we need to all maintain and uphold that commitment. Secondly, in terms of CAP, obviously there was a proposal to reduce the overall CAP budget. This is something that we don't agree with at all, and it's something that I consistently, at every General Affairs Council I attend, reiterate how important it is, not just for our rural farming community, but for our towns and villages, and for the production of food, and all of the reasons I outlined in my earlier presentation. We do, of course, recognise that there are other priorities there which need to be addressed, and I think our farmers in particular are very willing and ready to work with the environmental pillar as well, to make sure that anything that they do can help to mitigate the impacts of climate change, to reduce our carbon footprint. And I think Commissioner Hogan is very much in favour of where we can cooperate and where both of these agendas can work together to reduce our carbon footprint, at the same time supporting our farming and our rural communities, then we should be able to do that. So obviously this is an ongoing discussion within the Parliament, within the Council and my own General Affairs Committee, and we have always said that we would be willing to pay more in the upcoming budget, but only if programmes like CAP and indeed cohesion were protected, because these are traditional programmes which we feel add the European added value that we know is necessary when we're talking about our budgets. In terms of the future of Europe, and I suppose there were a few questions on this, but in terms of subsidiarity, where are we on this? I mean, this is one of the questions that was asked at the very beginning of this Future of Europe discussion. Should Europe do less more efficiently? Should it be big on the big things and small on smaller things? For us, what we feel is that we should focus on the areas that we have already committed to and that we are promised to. So again, a lot of discussion on the single market. We know that the single market in the area of goods is only 80% complete. In the area of services, 40%. The digital single market, which they're now saying will be like the fifth freedom, is only about 30% complete. So if we were to actually complete all of these three, there was a suggestion by Mark Rutte, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, recently, that you would add €1 trillion to the overall GDP of the EU, and while it's not all about the economy, but when that money is coming back into our own economies, obviously we can use that to improve our social settings, as well as invest in our infrastructure and key other areas that are important to us. So for us, our focus is to continue the work that we have promised to do, but obviously, again, anything that would suggest further treaty change, which is often asked, is not something that we would be particularly fond of moving in that direction at the moment. Senator Crockwell also asked about education, training and the Erasmus. The Erasmus Plus, which is the proposal for the next, or which is currently the new Erasmus programme, is not just looking at people who go to university. It can apply to students in primary school, secondary school, people working in trades, even possibly outside of the European Union. There was a question last night in the event I was at around Africa taking part, and I think something like this even would be possible under the Erasmus Plus. So it's about broadening the horizons and making sure that as many people benefit as possible. In terms of Hungary, again, a number of people have raised this. Senator Richmond, Deputy Haughey, Senator Coughlin. There were a lot of things happening which I think I personally don't agree with, and certainly we as a government don't agree with, and in particular in terms of the rule of law. There have been ongoing dialogues with Poland for quite some time at this stage, and I think it reached a point where the ongoing dialogue was not actually making an impact and that is when obviously the Article 7 was triggered, where we've had 2 hearings within the General Affairs Council, where we will have another hearing next week. And I think through that dialogue we have started to see progress and we have started to see change. The EU is built on dialogue, and I think we all agree that that's obviously the best way to address issues. But of course, if a country is not upholding the core values of the European Union, then there has to be accountability, and we need to be able to hold each other accountable, not just us and other countries, but we would expect the same with us. So in terms of Poland, this debate is continuing. We have seen changes, but we still need to see further change in terms of Hungary. We're perhaps starting at the beginning of that process more so. I would be encouraging, and have done the many times I've met with my Hungarian colleagues, to engage with the Commission that there is a legal process, that we need to follow this process, but we need to see results at the end of the day, and obviously that's for us as a key priority and a key focus. Again, in terms of Erasmus Plus and Horizon 2020, you know, and how much we're using it. Senator Richmond asked the question. I think about 55,000 students have availed of Erasmus since it began and since Ireland took part, but obviously we can always improve that and we can always increase our numbers. So that's something I think particularly with Erasmus Plus we are focused on, and again I think with the increased focus on languages, with the publication of the languages strategy last September, or this September gone, by Richard Bruton, where we want to increase the number of students taking up 2 languages by 25% in junior cert and leaving cert. Again, I think the renewed focus on languages will hopefully encourage people to look to study abroad, to travel to other countries, and to become more integrated in that sense. But I think there is obviously work to do, and something that we need to focus on in terms of EU jobs. In terms of our graduate programmes, we are only reaching about 40% of our targets, so we are significantly lower than we should be. We have always had a very proud tradition of holding very high positions within the European institutions. That unfortunately, I don't think it's because we have any less of a calibre, but I think the numbers are decreasing, and so a lot of people are coming to retirement age, and we do not have the same level of people applying. What we are asking of the Commissioner is that there would be geographical type competitions that would specifically target some other countries that are that have the same problem as us. So Denmark, the Netherlands and Sweden are 3 other countries that would be of a similar view to us. That's an ongoing discussion we're having, but if it's an issue that we don't address now, then we really will have less and less representation around the table within the institutions, and we know how important that can be. Again, in terms of Brexit, I suppose I don't know, Senator Richmond, the change predictions, whether that happened on foot of last night's vote, or whether the idea of a no-deal scenario obviously 50, really. has changed that. So, I mean, we're seeing these change on a daily basis. So I think we'll all keep an eye on how things go next Monday, most importantly. But whether or not a no-deal and no Brexit at all would be welcome, personally, I would say yes. I think, speaking to my European colleagues, while obviously this has taken a lot of people's time, a lot of money, a lot of energy and effort, at the same time nobody wants to see the UK leave. They have been an instrumental partner in the EU for the past 45 years, joining at the same time as us. We have a lot of the same priorities and goals and objectives. But of course, I think in the way that the conversation is happening on the future of Europe, you know, there would be questions that we would have to be able to answer and address. But obviously this is something they would have to ask for. But I don't think we would be stopping them. And obviously, to touch on what you said, we don't want people to leave. We want it to expand. We want the process of enlargement to continue. We want to ensure that other member states, and I see our ambassador from Georgia here as well, but other member states in the Western Balkans and further afield, that they can benefit in the same way that Ireland has. And obviously, once they are complying with the rules and the regulations, then, you know, we should be looking out, not looking to make ourselves smaller. Deputy Durkan, stay away from Plan B. So, you know, again, we're not preparing for a border on the island of Ireland, really, and it's not that we're hiding any planning from it. We're just not, because it's not something that we feel we can countenance happening. In terms of the single market, do we get the full benefit? I think, as with anything, there are sometimes winners and losers, and in certain parts of it you are going to benefit more. But again, I think, again, to go back to the fact that we as a country have made our membership work over the past 45 years through the single market, through our cohesion funding, through our infrastructural investment funds, through our CAP. And I think the focus should be now on improving the commitments, as I said earlier, that we have made, and making sure we complete the digital single market, the services, our banking union, capital markets union, and all of these other key areas that we have focused on. And again, it goes back to, are we a Europe of a single market or a peaceful EU of values? So again, I think while it's important to complete all of these other areas in terms of finance, we need to return to our values and make sure that the issues that are being raised now in terms of the rule of law, the freedom of speech, freedom of the media, and particularly in terms of education, that they are upheld at all times. Again, Bernard raised the issue of CAP, hugely important. Cannot stress enough how many times that we are saying this, engaging with our colleagues, and I know Minister Creed has met with similar like-minded agricultural ministers, and this is top of his agenda as well, to make sure that the budget is not just reduced, but if possible that it is increased, which I think we would all appreciate. Deputy Haughey, in terms of the political declaration, I mean, obviously this is a declaration without going into too much detail as to what the future will look like, and we can't get into that detail until they are a third country. But of course, first and foremost, the commitment to the Good Friday Agreement and the continuation to the Peace Plus, which is the new Peace and Interreg programme being proposed, is obviously significant for us. There was significant commitments on transport and aviation. Being an island country, this has been a priority for us, and in particular the commitments given on the land bridge, which was something that we welcomed and which is in the political declaration. You also have a commitment, and again it goes back to Senator Richmond's question on Erasmus, and how do we work if the UK are not part of this, or the Horizon 2020, the research and innovation. The UK have given a commitment in the future declaration that they want to continue to be part of the Horizon 2020, the research and innovation programmes, the Erasmus Plus, and again this is something that has been a priority for us. Two key areas obviously which were not specifically included on the level playing field element of the customs territory of the backstop, but obviously in fisheries and financial services, these are two industries that are significant for both us and the UK, but obviously some of our other colleagues with coastal borders within the UK, and obviously we have a commitment on those areas as well. So it's, I suppose, a lot of our priorities are very similar to other member states, but in particular the peace, the commitment to the peace funding, transport and aviation, given the fact that we are an island nation and how significant it is to us, and the area of fisheries as well would be one that I would say. The EU Council meeting in May, the future of Europe, what will be announced? I suppose member states are still engaging. While we finished our citizens' consultation last May, we have published our report. We will be presenting an outline of this report at the next December Council meeting, actually in 2 weeks' time, or next week, sorry. Other member states are still bringing theirs together, but I think between now and next May you will start to see a clearer idea from other member states what their priorities are. I'm not sure if we will have any announcement of specific policy directions from the event in Cebu in May next year, but I think we will have much greater clarity as to the direction that we want to go, and much greater clarity on some of the specific key issues that people want to address within individual member states. I think that's everything, unless there's something that I have left out. Yep. Again, Senator Coughlin, I suppose a lot of the discussion was on Brexit, and that's, I hope I answered most of the questions there, and my comments as well. But just again to thank members for your indulgence this afternoon, and obviously to thank those who are in the gallery as well today.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you for being here today, and your officials. And of course, the next number of days and weeks are terribly important to the future of our future and the future of the rest of the people in Europe, and of course to our neighbours across the water. So look, I believe that yourself, the senior ministers, Minister Simon, Coveney, and all the officials are really working as hard and as diligently as you can be. You know you have our support, you have the support of this committee, and everybody is just hoping that that we will have something after this that we can live with, and that will be possible for us to continue trading to the best of our ability, and that the future generations will look back on this time as turbulent, politically difficult, negotiating-wise, and but at the same time, I think that one thing that everybody could honestly say is that nobody, people in opposition, people in government, nobody can be critical, nobody can be saying that we are taking our eye off the ball, or that we are doing anything wrong or not doing things that we should be doing. I really honestly believe that, and I think it's important that you in your role and the Senior Minister knows that. So look, again, thank you for being here today. And I want to suspend now for a few minutes to allow the Minister to leave the room, and we'll continue then in private session.